Well, I'm really pleased and proud to introduce our next guest because he's me. No one's here to do that for me, so I have to do it myself. My name is Gary Sizer, and today I'm going to talk about what I like to call the trail is full of surprises. So if you're in the wrong classroom, if you're looking for Russian 101, that's across the hall. So I'll go ahead and just start with an introduction, and we'll just kind of gradually transition into the presentation. I use the word presentation loosely. I'm going to show you some pictures, I'm going to tell you some stories, I'm going to read you a couple of things, not very long. So it's really not so much a presentation as it is a multimedia extravaganza. You didn't know this when you walked in the door, but you're about to see the best presentation of the weekend. So, right now that the bar has been set ridiculously high, let's see what we can do with it. My name is Gary Sizer. I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2014. The first time I ever heard about the Appalachian Trail was in 1992 when somebody mentioned it to me in casual conversation, and I didn't even bother to check to see whether anyone had ever done it before. I just immediately knew right then and there, oh, I have to do this. Right? And I'm sure a lot of people who have done the trail kind of feel the same way. But this was 1992, and man, that's kind of a long time ago. I had a job, I had bills to pay, I had all that kind of stuff that makes the trail. It was my dream, right? It was a dream to hike the trail, and I held on to that dream for a really long time. And when you hold on to a dream for a really long time, it just kind of stays, a dream. It's, oh, I'm going to do that someday. And there's an old stupid joke about someday isn't actually a date on the calendar. There's never a good time to do it, right? There's never a good time to do it. So now is just as bad as doing it later. I'm just going to do it now. Why did I do it? Well, again, we got to go back to 1992. I was in boot camp, Paris Island. The first time I ever put on a backpack or slept in a tent. I was immediately in love with it for some reason. Just being outside and waking up. I don't care if it was in the dirt, the fresh air. There was a lot of yelling, but once I got over that, it was like, okay, I'm totally hooked. On the weekends, I went on backpacking trips. Every time I got leave, I used all of it to go on backpacking trips. And every single time I went out going out into the field, because that's what we said in the Marines. But every time I went out into the woods, I just wanted one more day. Just one more day is what I always wanted. So fast forward a few years later, I'm carrying on this thing, it's a dream, and I think, all right, well, we have to turn it into a plan or it's never going to happen. So I started saving my money. I took a look at White Blaze. Has everybody been to White Blaze? There are like 16 million posts on White Blaze. It's an online forum. And I know there's only been like a few thousand thru-hikers throughout history, which tells me right away that thru-hikers love to talk. It's a huge ratio of words to people. So I figured, they'll explain it to me when I get onto the trail. And I didn't really do much research. I did download a spreadsheet from a fellow by the name of Baltimore Jack that really helped me, get through my first few days. But one of the things that's very surprising about the trail is how your plan goes out the window. A lot of people talk about their plan. They have a spreadsheet and they know which day and where they're going to stop and all this stuff. Our plan changed on the way to Springer Mountain. So you kind of have to have that mindset of like, okay, nothing that I want to happen is going to happen. It might, but you just go into it assuming that it's not going to. So I had this plan. I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail in 2015. I saved my money. I had all of my plans ready to go. And it just became too much of a, I was ready to go and I still had to wait a year. Why do I have to wait a year? It didn't make any sense. So I called my boss and then I called my wife. I did those two things in exactly the opposite order that I should have, but I put in my 2 minutes notice. Like I just said, you know what, I have to do this thing. It's been bothering me my whole life. I have to go be in the woods for a while. And they said, you're crazy, we'll stop paying you. And I said, that's kind of what I expected, and that's what happened. So 3 weeks later, I was on the trail. I'm not kidding. My whole research I'd been backpacking a few times. I read Baltimore Jack's spreadsheet. I knew White Blaze existed. That was it. My plan was, I know I can last for 2 weeks, and I know that the towns are only 3 to 5 days apart. I'll just figure it out as I go. So I don't want to spoil anything, but we'll get to the end in a minute. So I have this slide up here that what is the Appalachian Trail, and I think everybody's really kind of familiar with what it is. And we all know the history, but one of the things that surprised me was like all of this stuff that's on this bulleted list here. These are all things that I didn't even learn about the trail until after I hiked it. Like I was one of those bad thru hikers who didn't know. Like I was just out there in the woods, trying to get from blaze to blaze and having a great time. I knew there was some history to the trail. I knew that it went way back in the past, and I would probably learn about it as I went. But no one ever like actually sat me down and said, hey, here's what you just did. This thing's been around since the 1920s. Somebody came up with the idea, a guy named Benton MacKaye, who, if you read about him, you'll learn that Benton he was kind of a poet, he was kind of a hippie, he was a free thinker, man. He wanted to write songs and spend time with the flowers, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. He had this vision of a place where people could go to, his quote was, to escape the hustle and bustle of modern day life. This is the 1920s. Does anybody remember the 1920s? I don't, but I understand they had horses on the road back then. Their idea of hustle and bustle is just like way different than ours. But it still applies. It still applies. Benton MacKaye was a dreamer. He was a visionary, but dreamers and visionaries, they do that thing that I talked about earlier where they have a dream and it just kind of stays that way. So Benton MacKaye met Myron Avery, who was, kind of his, some people say he was the exact opposite. I like to think of him as more kind of yin and yang, that when they came together, they completed this circle. Myron Avery was the type A personality, right angles, do things in order, stack your books according to height, that Benton MacKaye was not. And when the two came together, they butted heads. Of course, that's going to happen. But they made this thing happen, and it took them like 13 or 14 years of like politics and getting different states involved and all this stuff to basically just dig a trench this wide that's 2,000 miles long. When you put it like that, sure, why not? But there was a tremendous amount of effort that went into it, and no one had ever thought that someone was going to hike the entire thing all at once. It was meant to be just like a place where people could come in from the sides and visit and then go back out. Nobody ever thought you're going to start down here and go the whole way up. Earl Schaffer was the first guy to do it in 1948. So the trail had been in existence for almost 13 years before somebody officially hiked the entire thing in one go. Earl Schaffer was probably the first guy, he's technically the founder of Hike for Mental Health, because he said his reason for doing this was to hike off the war. He had what we called shell shock back then, but it's PTSD, the same thing, same problem, just different name. He was the first guy to do that. That's why he went to the trail. So from the very moment of its inception, it became a place of healing. It was a magical place right from the first time that somebody did it the whole way through. A lot of us who have been to festivals and seminars like this have met Gene Espy a bunch of times. He's the second guy to ever do it. Gene also didn't know that Earl had done it before him, so in his mind he wasn't trying to be the first to do anything. He was just kind of a rascal and wanted to see how far he could get. But it's kind of interesting, you go back in history and see all of these people who hike the trail, they're kind of like, they're like our version of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln to a certain extent. But it's kind of neat because the trail's so new relatively that some of these people are still around, and if you get a chance to meet them, oh boy, what a treat. So we got some statistics here. It goes through 14 states. There are 31 organizations that organize the trail. It would take a long time and be very boring for me to list them all, so I will do it now, starting with Georgia. No, I'm kidding. That's a terrible way to spend the next 5 minutes. But there's a lot of clubs that come together, and it's just a beautiful thing. And the whole thing's overseen by the ATC, which is based in Harpers Ferry. So yeah, the trail is full of surprises. This is a picture of the Katahdin Stream campground at the base of Mount Katahdin. You can see it's got the happy birthday banner there. That was 2 years ago today. I arrived at Mount Katahdin, which for some reason I remember that more than the fact that it's my birthday. It's like, I did this, I'm 2. This is how old I am. That's when I did Mount Katahdin. But it was really fun because I was excited. I'd been separated from my trail family for a long time. I hadn't seen my friends in a while. And my wife drove up from North Carolina. She took 2 days to drive up. She she reserved the campsite for us. They had the banner up. And then my friends who I hadn't seen in like at least a month, one of them's here, by the way. How long? It would be like a month since we'd seen each other?
It had been since...
At least 700 miles.
Since I think Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and then she just like comes barreling around the corner, great giant, and like tackles me, and it's just, it was truly cool. It was the best surprise right at the very end. The trail is definitely made, it's weird to say it this way, but I feel like the trail is made of people as much as it is of rocks and dirt and white blazes and paint and trees. It's made of people. The people who you meet on the trail are just unlike anybody else you would ever meet in, quote unquote, the real world. You hear that talk a lot when you're out on the AT. And this is one of those things where I said it was going to be a multimedia extravaganza. I'm going to take a minute and read you something here that kind of talks a little bit about what I'm trying to get to with this the trail is made of people thing. So we talked about what the trail is and the history and like the actual physical trail itself. You've heard about the white blazes. You've seen the pictures of breathtaking views from mountaintops. You know about the rocks and the rain and the mice and the moose. Those things are everywhere though, right? They're on pretty much every trail. So what's so special about this particular strip of dirt? Why the Appalachian Trail? Well, again and again, the answer that we hear most often is that it's the people. There's this sense of community. Hiking on the AT, whether you're striving for your first or ninth through hike, or simply doing a section, makes you a member of this giant dysfunctional family, comprised of mainly eccentric go-getters. You don't meet many slackers at 6,000 feet. In Georgia, I met a father and son who were finishing their section hike. The dad was in his 60s and the son was about 35. They had hiked every year for 17 years, and that was the year that they were finally completing the AT together. The son already had plans to do the whole thing again, but this time with his daughter. The trail is a place of tradition, not just the famous ones. In North Carolina, I met a man with breast cancer at a water stop. I never even knew such a thing existed. He was a nurse, too, and while we filtered our water together, his stories really opened my eyes. The trail is made of people. In Virginia, I met a mother and daughter at the top of Mount Rogers, just a short blue blaze off the AT. The summit has no views, only trees. These two were having a snack when I greeted them, and they shrugged and answered me in Russian. We shared our food and did our best to make each other laugh for almost an hour. The blazes go from Georgia to Maine, but the trail itself reaches much further. In Pennsylvania, I caught Lyme disease and suffered miserably over the rocks, desperate for any relief. A stranger took me into his home and brought me to a doctor. His wife made me soup, and they refused every offer I made to repay them. The trail has plenty of shelters, but the people around it will open their homes and their hearts for you. There is goodness in the world, and much of it flourishes around this strange, narrow path. I underestimated Maine and found myself stupidly short by a whole day's supplies and far from any town. I had eaten everything in my bag and emptied my pockets and still had many miles to go when I found myself suddenly knee-deep in blueberries. I probably wouldn't have died without them, but nevertheless that surprise gift of fruit was, in my eyes, a bounty which changed my outlook on life, if only just for that day. The trail provides, and magic doesn't always come from the angels, sometimes it comes from the very ground itself. Anyone who has explored the Green Tunnel for even a day has memories like these. City dwellers are baffled by us. Why would anyone want to do this? Many of us simply feel the inexplicable pull of the horizon, that desire to sleep under the stars, even if it means waking up in the dirt. We're baffled by it too. Some of us have no idea why we're out there at all. We can't help ourselves, so we formed a support group, and it meets among the White Blazes every year. So that's kind of my love letter to the AT. I want to talk a little bit about some of the surprising physical changes that happen during a thru hike. Your results may vary. One of the things that a lot of people do, and I'm sure you've seen this on YouTube, is the world famous the hiker beard growth selfie compilation video where you take a picture of your face every day and then at the end of your hike you stitch them together into 4.5 minutes of compelling video that no one wants to see. I mean, watching a video of someone's beard growing is really like watching grass grow. Right? After the first 10 seconds, you're like, oh, I get it, it's going to go really fast. You skip to the end and you go, this guy's ugly. But, okay, so I did this, I had to do it. It's one of those other traditions that's, it's kind of one of the new ones, only now that we have technology, cell phones in our pockets. So here's me on day one, May 10th, 2014, May 10th. I got a really late start. Remember I said I didn't prepare well, and I kind of, my start was very hasty. May 10th is a very late start date. My original plan was to go about halfway and flip-flop, but I'll talk about that later. Okay, so that was me on day one. You ever have one of those mornings when you get up and you just don't want to go to work, but you have to because you live at work? Yeah, this. When I look at this picture, I have a couple of ideas come to mind. One is that I think I want to start a TV show called Unfrozen Caveman Hiker, and then maybe he could be the spokesperson for Leave No Trace, and his slogan could be "Garbage and fire rings bad." I don't know. It looks like a cave. No one wants to see that, but the extreme changes that happen to someone's body in this amount of time. Like I said, your results may vary. But I mean, you can see, for some reason I got like pecs and shoulders, and for the first time in my life I had more than one ab. Back to my before picture. Nobody wants to see that for too long. But much better. But I mean, no, seriously though, like the shoulders, and like the biceps, people, when they saw this picture, I put this on the internet when I got home, and people emailed me and they said, "Did you walk on your hands?" And actually the answer is yes. Yes, you do for a while. Like there's a joke that the first 80% of the trail, if you're northbound, the first 80% of the trail requires 20% of the effort. The last 20% requires 80% of the effort. The entire trail, if you graph the difficulty, looks like AWOL's map of Katahdin. Like right at the end, everything just like shoots off the page. That's where you start getting your vertical, like literally vertical brick, rock, they're not brick walls, rock walls with rebar pounded into. So you're doing as much hand over hand work in the northern parts as you are, way more than you would expect. So that really surprised me. So this is so I didn't break off my trekking pole. I got new trekking poles in New Hampshire. So that's how far from Georgia to New Hampshire I wore. This is a relatively new trekking pole for comparison. This is what my poles looked like after about 1,900 miles of touching the ground, just like this. It's like Chinese water torture, But think about this. Okay, if that's happening to a piece of metal, right? You're wearing down a chunk of metal. A good 2 inches of it erodes after all those miles. What's happening to your feet? And your bones and your body, and there's a lot going on. There was something that I'd heard a million times and I ignored, because that's what a lot of thru hikers do, unfortunately, is that your feet are going to get bigger on your hike. You're going to go up a size. And my feet went up a size, and I just kept buying the size that I used to, because that's what size I always bought, and I was compressing my feet. And that pounding every day wound up doing some serious nerve damage to the insides of my feet, and actually had a problem walking barefoot for almost a year after my hike was over. But it's surprising that things like that happen, because you think, like everybody hearing this thinks, oh, well, I would immediately recognize that my feet are larger and I'd change my shoe size. This guy's a moron. I mean, that's really what you're thinking. But I mean, it creeps up on you. This doesn't happen instantly. Like, oh, my feet hurt a little. And then like a week later, oh, my feet hurt a little more than they used to. It's everything that comes on is so gradual, you don't notice it. No one ever got sick on the trail. Like, I joked earlier about, some days you wake up and you don't feel like going into work. But you know what I mean? Like if you have like an office job or a retail job or some kind of job that you get up and go to every day. There's those days where you get the sniffles, or like you get the flu, or nobody ever got sick on the trail. And I think a lot of that had to come from, like being surrounded by fresh air or doing exercise every day. Now I say no one got sick. A lot of us got diseases. That's much worse than being sick. Everything on the trail is extreme to the, multiplied by 10. I could talk about a lot of the diseases and stuff, but that's unpleasant. And that kind of falls under the category of preparation, and I think that's, there are other sessions that focus on that. I kind of like to talk about, I've got a bunch of slides here that are really just a bunch of pictures of things that surprised me along the trail, and each one of them is kind of like a little story prompt. So, like this guy right here, can you see him? Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a barred owl. Here he is right there in the center, you can see his eyes. So that owl is probably, I took that picture, he's probably about as far as, like from me to those windows. Coming up the trail into North Carolina on the, your very last day coming out of Georgia is all uphill. I figured out why they call North Carolina the Highlands, because you get up there and there's still, like Georgia's got a bunch of mountains and North Carolina's got a bunch of mountains, but they're all up here, So you're coming up out of Georgia on that first day, and this owl is in this tree about 10 feet off to the right of the trail, and he's still there to this day. And I know this for a fact because I follow a lot of hikers on Facebook, and I read a lot of blogs, and I just, every year when the new batch of hikers starts, I follow them. And everybody coming up that hill posts a picture of a barred owl that, it was 10 feet from the trail coming up out of Georgia into North Carolina. So I think he just sits there and watches hikers. I mean, I would, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Instant recognition. You've seen these guys before, right? Who hasn't? This is actual size, which is really kind of so the red eft, they come out, usually you see them like the day right after it rains, in the morning. They're all over the trail, and they're really only they're this big, like the size of your pinky finger. They look like baby carrots with legs. They're so cute. But when you see them and they're this big, they're only like 1/3 of the way through their life cycle. And what they're doing is they're working their way to bigger and more remote water sources. So they're trying to get away from like the streams and the springs that we walk by every day, and they're working their way to like the lakes that are hidden behind mountains, and they're looking for ponds and like big bodies of water where they will actually, they don't get that big, but they'll get to be about 6 or 7 inches long. They turn olive drab, almost the same color as my shirt. They lose their legs, and they look like a cross between a tadpole and a fish. And it's the eastern newt is the proper name. But you see them in this stage all over the trail, and they're just, they're so cute. They waddle like they look like claymation dinosaurs when they walk. It's so, they're so cute. Don't step on them though. Oh yeah, these guys. Always surprised when I run into a bear. I'm surprised how surprised I am. Because they're all over the place. Okay, raise your hand if you've encountered a black bear in the wilderness. Right? Every hand in the room came up, even some too. Right? Okay. So it's like a 400-pound raccoon. You just go like this and they run away. If you really, if a bear's really being a problem, take out your camera. Right? The first time I ran into a bear was actually on my my shakedown hike. Okay, I said I didn't prepare. I actually, I did a little bit of preparation. I went out 3 days before I was supposed to hike the AT start. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, so I've got access to all these great trails. And I went to a place called Flower Gap, which is in the Pisgah National Forest. And it's this big, wide open field. There's a little tiny mountain to the north, a little tiny mountain to the south. And then other than those two, 360 degrees of just wave after wave of green mountains just all the way to the horizon. It's so beautiful. And there's not really a lot of trees up there either, so you're kind of above tree line. Most of the trees are like, tall enough that, anything on its hind legs can get at it pretty easily. But I was standing in this field, and I was eating my dinner. My camp was about a mile away, so I brought my dinner to this field. My pack was leaning up against a tree. There were a couple of rocks in the field, and one of them started moving while I was eating. And it's weird how the brain, even though you logically you understand that that's a bear, the brain thinks there's a large garbage bag fluttering across the field, because you don't expect to see it, and the way they move, they're silent. They don't make a sound. They glide across the field. So I'm looking, I'm like, no, that's not a garbage bag. That's a cow. That's the biggest dog I ever saw. That's a bear, and he's headed right to my pack, where my food is. So, I've got the food that I'm holding, this is not going to last me 3 days. So, I've never charged a bear before, and I still haven't, but, we started doing this sideways race to the pack. He was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and he wasn't backing off. And I said, "Hey, bear, that's my food. Get away." And the bear gave me that look that was like, I don't speak English, right? And I just barely, I didn't mean to say that. I just barely got to my pack, right before we were this close. And I didn't want to make any sudden movements, and I just backed away, and I went back to my camp, and I left. All right, so I didn't see the bear again for a while, but when I woke up the next morning, the pitiful little tree that I had thrown my bag over, the branch was snapped off, and the food bags, there was nothing left. It was all covered with bear slobber and teeth marks. And there was a group of people camping near me. There were 13 of them. And they had the same thing happen to them. All 13 people, 3 days worth of food. So imagine how many calories that is. One beast, one meal. Of course I left. Okay, I'm done. Fortunately I was only a day from the car, so it didn't completely ruin it. It's supposed to be a 3-day shakedown hike. So I went back to the car and I thought, all right, so it's day -3, and I've already lost all of my food to a bear. I did the math and it worked out to an infinite number of bear encounters, which turned out to be true because I saw so many of them on the trail that I lost count. One more bear story because this one's fun. New Jersey. Yeah, people are really, that's a surprise. New Jersey has the highest density of black bear population of any state on the trail. More bears per square mile in New Jersey than anywhere else. And when we got to the Brinks Road shelter, there was a bear trap in front of the shelter. Not like one of those Wile E. Coyote, like those, not one of those bear traps. This was a big, like a metal tube. Think of like a 55-gallon drum, but a 500-gallon drum tipped on its side with a guillotine-style door that slams on one end. Big white letters on the front that say bear trap. You remember from my previous story, they don't speak English. So this sign meant nothing to the bear. Again, we didn't see him at dinner time, but at breakfast we saw the bear come out of the woods. That same like weird, eerie, silent, like no way can something 400 pounds make that little noise. Like not even a single twig of this thing cracks. Walks right into the tube, steps on the pressure plate. There's like a bag of oranges or bagels or something hanging on the inside. And steps on the pressure plate, door slams down, boom! The bear freaks out. He's slamming around inside this thing. It's got braces on the side, but it's still rocking back. It sounds like somebody backed a Volkswagen into a dumpster. It's just making so much racket, and then like it just stops. The bear's like, oh, I guess I live here now. And it stopped making noise. You know, it had a little metal screen for it to get air. You know, we looked in. Yeah, he's still in there. He huffed at us. So we called the phone number that was listed under the big white letters that said bear trap. And it was like the New Jersey division of the National Forest Service or something like that. I don't know precisely. But you know, a guy showed up with us like a two-wheel, like a front-wheel drive Toyota pickup truck. I'm like, you're not going to get this bear in that thing. But he, you know, he was just there to like make sure we weren't prank calling or anything. He's like, yep, we got a real bear here. Calls it in. So we asked him, you know, so what's going to happen to the bear? Why is he in this can in the first place? And he explained, as I'm sure most of you know, there's a problem all over the AT with bears eating human food, which you can't really blame them. Have you guys tried human food? It's amazing. It makes them not want to eat, you know, blueberries and squirrel parts and stuff. I can't blame them. But they get in the habit of eating our food and they just won't stop. And this bear is coming into the shelter, which is bad. So they set the trap and they said, you know, they tag him and they let him go. But if the bear is already tagged, they recognize it as a repeat offender. I guess they have a database of bears. And they relocate them. They take them somewhere else. And I asked them, well, where do you take your bad bears? Where's bear prison for you guys? He said, well, Pisgah National Forest, which is, you know, near. True story.
Video of you catching the bears on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's right. My nephew just pointed out that there's a video on my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for Gary Sizer, one of the videos, we actually had our cameras rolling when the bear got caught, so you can see that, you know, I'm only making some of that up. Who's run into a rattlesnake on the trail for real? Oh, all the hands go up again, right? Yeah, I was talking to someone earlier today about like somebody on the PCT killing rattlesnakes or something. I don't know, but you're not supposed to even touch these guys. They're, first of all, okay, so this is a timber rattler, and you're going to see timbers, you're going to see copperheads, you're going to see, you know, basically, you know, maybe a diamondback, not too many, but you know, your basic rattlesnake, maybe 5 or 6 feet long. The big ones might be about as big around as my arm. I have skinny arms, so don't work out. But when they're shaking their tails like this, when they're making that sound, it's a myth. People say that means they're getting ready to attack. You know, and that means that's their warning. All they're doing when they're making that sound is they just don't want to get stepped on. All they are doing is sunbathing. Their brains are the size of a walnut, and all they think is like, oh, light, warmth, something big coming. They're not trying to attack you. They're not hunting you. And really, the best way to deal with a rattlesnake, if you can, I'm going to demonstrate. Here's how you deal with a rattlesnake on the trail. Oh, a rattlesnake. That was close. No sticks, no rocks, no, you know, he just wants to be left alone. It's always a surprise to see them, though. Who knows where this is? Delaware Water Gap? That was the correct answer.
That's walking right across from Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
That's right. You're getting ready to finally leave Pennsylvania. I don't really know too much geologically about this rock formation, and I don't have any stories that relate to it at all. I just think it's really neat, and I like to show it because it's pretty. It's just there's not another mountain like this anywhere on the AT. I mean, it looks like pulled taffy, and then it got frozen in the middle or something. I don't know. It's just. And of course, the picture doesn't do its scale. You stare at this thing for miles as you're walking down into this gap, and you just see it getting larger and larger and larger until you're right at the foot of it. Oh, that's one of a million reasons I was glad to be gone from Pennsylvania.
It's really just one mountain.
So, and it's, yeah,
It's one mountain. The river went through it and cut it in half.
that's right, yep. The Devil's Driveway. Franconia Ridge, another beautiful place. You see tons of pictures of it, and it's still amazingly surprising and beautiful when you get there. This is kind of this is the beginning of the whites of New Hampshire. And I make air quotes and I lower my voice and I say the whites because, that's where, that's where the shoulder muscles and the abs come from. Is you're getting ready to start doing this. But the whites, they tell you when you're on your thru hike and you're approaching New Hampshire, if you're going north, you just hear about it for like a month leading up to it. There's so much buildup. Like you're going to get to the whites and you're going to cut your mileage to a third. How many miles you're doing a day, divide it by 3. That's how many you're going to do. And without fail, every northbound thru hiker ignores that advice. Even when they're hearing it from southbounders who were just there like 2 days ago, we ignore that advice. And we got to the whites. And we do 20 miles a day. It's kind of, that's your habit when you're in go mode and you're through hike. 20 miles a day, no big deal. We think, okay, maybe half. We're gonna do 11 miles today. Nope, we did 6. First day in the whites, 6 miles. So not even a third of our daily mileage. Second day in the whites, we did 2 miles. And our third day in the whites, we zeroed in a shelter because there was a freak snowstorm that came out of nowhere. And we were above tree line, and the winds were, I think they were sustained 45 with gusts in the 60s to 70s. And so, we had to send someone for water, and we drew straws, and like the guy came back missing a water bottle, and his raincoat was torn. And the whites are for real, man. Like, when they say you're gonna lose your mileage, they're not kidding. Like people go backwards in the whites, but it's so beautiful though. Like, okay, here's Franconia Ridge, and you see, like, this is actually the trail. If you've never been there, like, this line on that, like, walking the top of a roof, like, that's the trail. It's not quite like this. You've got about 3 feet on either side, but you look to your left, and it's, 45 degrees down, nothing. Look to your right, 45 degrees down, nothing. But the background is, again, like I said, those wave after wave of rolling green hills. And when we were there, you can see there are kind of some storm clouds coming. The storm was coming right at us, and it's right at eye level. It's just the most beautiful thing to see until you can't see anything, and then you're in trouble. But that's kind of what you get into when you're in the whites. That's not on the trail. Doesn't go up there, but you walk by that. I just wanted to give an example of how different the terrain is up here. I'm from North Carolina. We've got a lot of big hills down there, but they're all shaped like that one that I showed at the beginning, where like you can see the top and it looks like you can get there because you can. Mahoosuc Notch. So AWOL lists Mahoosuc Notch as either the most fun or most difficult mile on the AT. I think it's kind of both. I thought for me it was like a big playground. Mahoosuc Notch. If you've never been there, if you've never set your own eyes on it, you've probably heard. Now this is New Hampshire, but Mahoosuc Notch is in Maine, and what's around it is very similar. So you've got these vertical rock walls. You're like vertical rock wall. Say that twice at a normal speed, and they're each 1,000 feet tall, and they're each 1,000,000 years old. And for the last 1,000,000 years, they've just been dropping boulders and they're the size of cars and houses and couches and baseballs. Every size of boulder you can possibly imagine, and the sadistic, twisted individuals who maintain the AT up there painted white blazes right through that mess. Oh, and it's so much fun, because you'll get to a rock place where it's like you see the arrows, they painted white arrows pointing into this black hole, and you just think, I guess I have to go in there. Or I'm done. This is where I stop, And you take off your pack and you push it ahead of you and you crawl and you get to do the little Spelunker Shuffle for the first and only time on the trail. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people find it to be like, oh, it's a playground and fun. But I mean, you can go around it, I guess, if you want. But it's so much fun. The 100-mile wilderness. Oh, geez. I almost get a little teary-eyed every time I think about the 100-mile wilderness, just how beautiful this place is. Who's been through it? Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir here then, so you guys know about what, for the few hands that didn't go up, like everybody else is getting a little teary-eyed too, thinking about 100-mile wilderness. because regardless of which direction you're going, it's a special place. If you're going north, you're almost done and you don't want to be done. If you're going south, it's right at the beginning and you're just getting greeted with the best that Maine has to offer. Just the best of the best, no matter what time of season. The best foliage, it's got the most amazing views, it has the most incredible mosquitoes and black flies, depending on what time you're there. Yeah, it's pretty difficult. There's a big sign at either end that warns you, like this is serious. There's no resupply anywhere in the middle. A lot of people take different approaches when they go to it. Some people say, oh, I'm going to try to burn through it in 3 days. I took 8 days to go through the Hardball Wilderness because I was one of those people who I didn't want it to be done. I mentioned earlier that I hit Mount Katahdin. It was October the 8th. We stayed at the bottom because it was really bad weather. We went up on the 9th. You can see all the rime ice that was on, at the tablelands. It was pretty crazy that day. You see Mount Katahdin. I joked about it earlier, that elevation profile thing I talked about. In an AWOL guide, you read this book, and all it is a black line on the page that tells you, here's how tall your mountains are going to be that day. And when you get to that last page, the one that has Katahdin on it, they had to add extra lines to the page. They had to change the scale so they could fit the whole thing on. And the black line, it just starts down here at the bottom. And right there at the last part of the page, it just goes like this. And that's exactly how that mountain is, too. It's just 5 miles of just the most beautiful uphill struggle we'll ever fight. And then you get to the top, and then it's the most amazing, incredible experience you've ever had. You've just achieved all of, this thing that you've been yearning for and dreaming for, and then it's done. It's gone. I mean, just like that, you're done. Like, you're on top of Mount Katahdin, you're blissful, you've finally done this huge thing, and now it's time, it's time to go home. And that's where the mental challenges, I think, really start. People talk about the mental struggles that you have to fight on the trail. And for a lot of us, those mental struggles on the trail were like, what can we do to stay on the trail? A lot of people, their mental struggle is, like, oh, I'm done, I'm tired, I want to go home. And you lose most of those at the beginning. But by the time you get to Mount Katahdin, when you're standing at that sandwich board, you've done things that you're ashamed of to get to that mountain. You know what I mean? Like, I let my feet be damaged for, potentially forever because I wanted to get to the top of that thing. So it's kind of weird how, this obsession develops when you're out there. And I like to talk to people before they start, if I can, and tell them this, that one of the best things that's going to get you a successful hike, notice I'm making big air quotes on this one, is a successful hike, is that on day one you have to be willing to accept the fact that it's probably not going to last for 2,183.5 miles or whatever. Your successful hike might stop in New Hampshire. You might not be able to physically make it. You might not be able to physically make it past Harper's Ferry or Georgia. I know somebody who sprained their ankle on the approach trail, badly enough that they had to wait a year. On the approach trail. So, I know my plans changed on the way to Springer Mountain, but, the change in the form of I'm going to be 3 hours late, I should be so grateful for how little the changes to my plans turned out to really be. So, some interesting things happen on the trail that bring up some mental challenges, and one of them is this shift in perspective. All right, so let's talk about some positive stuff. You get this shift in perspective when you're out there about what's really important. You hear talk about that an awful lot. I remember even along the way, I was ditching gear from my pack the entire time. I thought I was done losing gear in Georgia. I thought I was done when I got through mountain crossings and they dumped my pack for me. I thought I was done when they did that in Harper's Ferry. And I summited Mount Katahdin 2 years ago, and I'm still finding ways to improve my pack. It just never. There's never a time when you're quote unquote there. It's this thing that the perspective that you get for what you really need. I got off track there for a little bit, but the perspective changes. So I got up to the northern parts of the trail. I was almost done, and I realized that my only luxury item that I had in everything that I kept, my world, everything I kept was a cup. That's kind of like a kung fu Buddhist monk walking the earth kind of thing. People have those kind of strange mental revelations like that too. They come back to the real world. Again, you hear these words that hikers use. They say out there when they're talking about being on the AT, and they say real world when they're talking about, electricity and running water and alarm clocks. Because it really is like two separate realities. And when you come back to this one, it's not always easy. You've got, suddenly you've gone from, the sunshine and wind and bird song, and now it's, right angles, alarm clocks, and Janice in the next cubicle clipping her fingernails. Who does she think she is? It's not that, the things that you stress about are just completely different when you get back. And some people have a hard time when they finish their hikes. It's interesting because some people go to the trail to deal with PTSD, and some people develop PTSD on the trail. It's okay to laugh at that because it's curious, but it's also funny, isn't it? You find this idealized lifestyle that you've just been so happy and euphoric for all this time, and now you have to come back to the real world. It's hard for a lot of people. Some people, however, they finish their thru hikes and they're like, cheeseburgers and electricity, yes, and they're fully on board when they get back and they have no problems at all. The spectrum is just all over the place. When I came back, my personal story was I was one of those people who had a very hard time readjusting to the real world. So I actually, I tried to go back to work for a while, and that didn't go so well. I didn't fit anymore. I was a computer engineer. I worked in a lot of tall buildings. I worked with ones and zeros, and I was very good at it. And when I came back, the phrase I like to use was that I downloaded my brain's operating system, downgraded my brain's operating system to an earlier version which can't handle the data rate that you guys are throwing at me. Okay, too many lights, too many and basically I started having panic attacks, and I had to go sit on a couch for a while and talk to somebody about what was happening. And the way I dealt with it was I kept hiking. I found a way to keep hiking and still be a productive member of society, if that's even possible. But what I did was like I said, I mentioned earlier, I live in Asheville, so I have access to all this beautiful land, all these national forests. So I would take a tiny little computer, little keyboard and an iPad, and I would go sit by waterfalls, and I would sit by streams. And I have, I carried, while I was hiking, I carried little yellow Write in the Rain notebooks with me every day. And every day without fail, I wrote something in it, even if it was just one sentence, just something to remember, what happened during this experience. So I spent the next 11 months after my thru hike, continuing to live in my tent and hiking and, hanging out by waterfalls and writing this book. And I wrote Where's the Next Shelter in the 11 months following my thru hike, published it, I self-published on Amazon in November of last year, and somehow it became a bestseller on Amazon in travel, hiking, and travel adventure, and it stayed in the top 10. It's still in the top 10 today. I was so grateful to this. I thought my mom will read this, and she did. But I didn't know that this is going to become. This is now what this is what I do. I hike and I tell my stories, and I go around to outfitters and schools and churches and trail events, and I teach people how to prepare for their own thru hikes, or how to respect the wilderness and leave no trace. And fortunately, the book has allowed me to not have to go back to those ones and zeros. So that's kind of my next shelter. The book turned out to be. But there's one last thing I'd like to leave you with, and then we'll have a few more minutes for questions and answers if you guys are of that mindset, or if you want to haul ass to the next thing, that's cool too. But when people talk about thru hiking the AT, a lot of you guys here, a lot of you guys and gals have done this, and you hear a lot of the same questions from people, when they want to do what you just did. And they ask, has anyone ever taken a guitar? Has anyone ever taken their dog with them, or has anyone ever, done? It's always starts with has anyone ever, and the answer is always yes. Yes, they have. Whatever your end to has anyone ever is, the answer is yes. A 60-something woman with an army blanket and sneakers did it. A blind guy did it. Multiple double amputees have done it. Diabetes, cancer, hemophilia, dementia, mania, and depression have all finished the trail. You can too. So bring your dog, bring your colored pencils, bring your significant other, or don't. Wear shoes or boots, or sandals, or nothing. It's all been done, which means that you can too. Can I bring a musical instrument? Of course. What about a xylophone? I suppose. If you really try, sure. I'm pretty sure someone carried a tuba the whole way once. Go for it. Keep the following in mind, and you'll be fine. Your plan will change. That doesn't mean it will fail, just that whatever you're picturing the trail to be like is not actually what will happen. The good news is that you will have literally hundreds of opportunities to change your plan along the way. Wrong footwear? Tough it out for 3 to 5 days and adjust. Wrong sleeping pad? Tough it out for 3 to 5 days and adjust. Regretting your decision to carry a pool table the whole way? Just around the bend there's a post office. Send that sucker home. As long as you wake up every day and you can still walk, you'll make it. All the rest is just details, and as long as you're okay with change and the unknown, you'll be fine. Unless you're making a record attempt or an actual attempt at a world record, there are no rules other than leave no trace and hike your own hike, of course. Remember, this is your hike. You get to define the terms of your own success. Some of the side trails are actually more beautiful than the AT. Take them, but only if you want to. Just by deciding to even try, you are already on a great adventure. You'll lose count of how many times day hikers and bartenders will tell you, I wish I could do something like this. They'll trail off, and you'll lose count of how many times you resist telling them, but you can, you really can, because you are living proof of this. Be smart, check for ticks, get lots of protein, and take care of your feet. Listen to your body, and you'll be surprised by how quickly the miles will pile up behind you. When you get to the 1,000-mile point, you'll look back at how excited you were to make 100, and you'll smile so hard that the top half of your head might fall off. You'll carry that level of joy and euphoria for the next 1,000 miles. Or, more accurately, it will carry you. You won't even have to try anymore. You'll tear it up. So, take care of each other, take care of the trail, and it will take care of you. Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if they're using this room for anything, if we're going to get kicked out afterwards or whatnot, but if you guys are, if you want to ask any questions, I love doing Q&A. So anything you want to know about the trail or my life or atomic chemistry or the whatever, anything. If there are no questions, come on, someone's got a question. There's never not been a question. Hudson, what you got?
Where have you been hiking since?
Where have I been hiking since? That's a great question. So I haven't done any like super long hikes since then. I haven't done like the CDT or the PCT or anything like that. I redid a 100-mile section of the Shenandoahs that I really loved. I went back this summer for a week, hiked through the roller coaster and into Harper's Ferry. That was fun to see. A whole lot of hikes. I mentioned the Pisgah National Forest. Our house is 10 minutes away from the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we've been there for it'll be 10 years this December, and I still haven't even hit all of the trail heads, let alone all of the trails that are within an hour's drive of my house. So, when I go hiking, I just I walk to the back door, I pick what I need. I get in the car and I'm on a trail in like 15 minutes. I'm so blessed and so lucky. So, I hike pretty much every week. So I've been constantly hiking. I'm so lucky. Someone else had a question.
How did your wife handle?
Oh, that's a great. So how did my wife handle all this? That's a great question. So Katie was instrumental in the success of this. I mean, when I say success, I mean me not dying, right? Whatever else happened, Katie keeps the wheels on the bus, is what I like to say. She's my trail boss. She's also a hiker. She hasn't done anything super long like this, but we have plans to do parts of the IAT together, some of the CDT. But while I was on the trail, she was mission control back home for sure. When I would need if it was time for a new pair of shoes, Katie was on top of it. She would make sure they were waiting for me at the next town. For the first 500 miles, because we lived within an hour's drive of the trail, she came out and met me on the weekends. So she hiked Standing Indian with me. She hiked at Klingman's Dome with me. That's where you guys met, wasn't it? Or no, you didn't meet until Hot Springs.
No, I missed that. I missed all of it that day.
Yep. So she got to hike with me about 4 or 5 weekends the first month, 6 weeks, and then I never saw her again until Kentucky. So she was heavily involved, big time. Yep. Mental support, moral support, logistics. I mean, could not have done it without. I could have done it without her. Don't quote me on that. No way I could have done it without her. It would have been worse if I could have.
I gotta add something about Katie. There's no way I could have done it without her either. Because her sister took me in when I had shin splints and I needed to take a week off to heal the shin splints, or I would have been done. Like, there was just no way I could move. And
So, yeah, this actually illustrates a really good point about the trail and how it is a family. Like, the trail is a family. So Megan, trail name Voldemeg.
Yeah.
You know, we met somewhere in Georgia. You know, and we
some
hiked.
mosquito-y shelter.
Yeah, you know, we hiked for a while and became good friends. And you know, after she met my wife at a couple of the places that she hiked with us, they became good friends. And next thing you know, like, you know, when we got split up, Megan and my wife are talking more often than I am with with Katie. So when Megan runs into trouble much later along the trail, who's she call? Katie, of course, because they're good friends. So, you know, here's this young lady who I just like met in a shelter in Georgia somewhere, and now she's hanging out at my sister-in-law's house in New York, recovering. It's so weird how the connections that the trail make just reach so far. It's just so amazing.
You're very right when you say that the community is amazing. You just don't realize how many people are out there to help, because, of course, you know, Katie's sister helped me, and then Hudson and Big Blue are over here too. I got cellulitis, blessed again with another thing that would have taken me off the trail, and I needed to get to a hospital to get some antibiotics because my foot swelled up and I couldn't walk. And Hudson and Big Blue took me in, so Hudson, I think, drove quite far out of his way to pick me up. So it's just really amazing the community that you find, and all the people who are just willing to help a stranger out and do it without asking questions, really.
Yeah, I'll never get over how amazing that is. You know, it's one of those things that makes us all think, why can't the rest of the world work like this? You know, people actually helping strangers, and just, yeah, it's fantastic. You guys are amazing. Well, and you guys are amazing. Thank you again for coming out today and for sitting through this. I know it was a real chore. I appreciate you guys struggling through this with me. I did bring a couple of books too. If you guys want to stop by, I'll sign some for you. I'm also over at the vendor fair of the table if you want to just head over there. So again, thank you all so much. You guys have been great. Thank you.